Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Financial Edition. And today we're going to continue our reading of The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. And sorry about the glare there on the cover of the book. Okay, so let's get to it. Today we are going to be reading chapter 13, and this is part 1. I'm just going to move the camera in a little bit. If you have your own book, you could follow with us with your book. Or if you don't have a book, you can follow with us here on the screen. Whatever works for you. Okay. All right, here we go. Chapter 13, Masquerade in Moscow. The secret society founded by Cecil Rhodes for the purpose of world domination. The establishment in America of a branch of that group called the Council on Foreign Relations, the role played by financiers within these groups in financing the Russian Revolution, the use of the Red Cross mission in Moscow as a cover for that maneuver. One of the greatest myths of contemporary history is that the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was a popular uprising of the downtrodden masses against the hatred ruling class of the Tsars. As we shall see, however, the planning, the leadership, and especially the financing came entirely from outside Russia, mostly from financiers in Germany, Britain, and the United States. Furthermore, we shall see that the Rothschild formula played a major role in shaping these events. This amazing story begins with the war between Russia and Japan in 1904. Jacob Schiff, who was head of the New York investment firm of Kuhn Loeb and Company, had raised the capital for large war loans to Japan. It was due to this financing that the Japanese were able to launch a stunning attack against the Russians at Port Arthur, and the following year to virtually decimate the Russian fleet. In 1905, the Mikado awarded Jacob Schiff a medal, the Second Order of the Treasure of Japan, in recognition of his important role in that campaign. I wonder if Jacob Schiff is related to Adam Schiff. Trump calls him Shifty Schiff. Oh, he's got the nickname Shifty Schiff. But what was the other nickname he got? Pencil Neck Schiff or something like that? I don't remember. Some of these nicknames are kind of funny. During the 2 years of hostilities, thousands of Russian soldiers and sailors were taken as prisoners. Sources outside of Russia, which were hostile to the Tsarist regime, paid for the printing of Marxist propaganda and had it delivered to the prison camps. Russian-speaking revolutionaries were trained in New York and sent to distribute the pamphlets among the prisoners. And to indoctrinate them into rebellion against their own government. We're kind of seeing it play out uh, this year, isn't it? 2025 with the LA riots or the LA protest, quote unquote protests, right? And the No Kings protest. Interesting, eh? When the war was ended, and George Floyd, another one. When the war was ended, these officers and enlisted men returned home to become virtual seeds of treason against the Tsar. They were to play a major role a few years later in creating mutiny among the military during the communist takeover in Russia. Trotsky was a multiple agent. One of the best-known Russian revolutionaries at that time was Leon Trotsky. In January of 1916, Trotsky was expelled from France and came to the United States. It has been claimed that his expenses were paid by Jacob Schiff. There is no documentation to substantiate that claim, but the circumstantial evidence does point to a wealthy donor in New York. He remained for several months while writing for a Russian socialist paper, the Novomir New World, and giving revolutionary speeches at mass meetings in New York City. According to Trotsky himself, on many occasions a chauffeured limousine was placed at his service by a wealthy friend, identified as Dr. M. In his book My Life, Trotsky wrote, "The doctor's wife took my wife and the boys out driving and was very kind to them. But she was a mere mortal, whereas the chauffeur was a magician, a titan, a superman. With the wave of his hand, he made the machinery obey his slightest command." Huh, that's interesting. Does that mean there's no cars in Russia at the time? To sit beside him was a supreme delight. When they went into a tea room, the boys would anxiously demand of their mother, "Why doesn't the chauffeur come in?" And that quote was from Leon Trotsky, My Life, New York Scribner's 1930, page 277. It must have been a curious sight to see the family of the great socialist radical, defender of the working class, enemy of the capital of capitalism, enjoying the pleasures of tea rooms and chauffeurs, the very symbols of capitalist luxury. On March 23, 1917, a mass meeting was held at Carnegie Hall. Some people might pronounce it Carnegie. That's an interesting pronunciation. Um, to celebrate the abdication of Nicholas II, which meant the overthrow of Tsarist rule in Russia. Thousands of socialists, Marxists, nihilists, and anarchists attended the sheer event. Attended to cheer the event. The following day, there was published on page 2 of the New York Times a telegram from Jacob Schiff, which had been read to his audience. He expressed regrets that he could not attend, and then described the successful Russian Revolution as, quote, "what we had hoped and striven for these long years," end quote. And that quote was from Mayer calls pacifist traitors in the New York Times, March 24, 1917, page 2. Okay. In February 3rd, 1949, issue of the New York Journal American, Schiff's grandson, John, was quoted by columnist Charlie Knickerbocker, that's a funny last name, Knickerbocker, as saying that his grandfather had given about $20 million for the triumph of communism in Russia. There's a footnote about that. It says to appraise Schiff's motives for supporting the Bolsheviks, we must remember that he was a Jew and that Russian Jews had been persecuted under the Tsarist regime. Consequently, the Jewish community in America was inclined to support any movement which sought to topple the Russian government, and the Bolsheviks were excellent candidates for the task. As we shall see further along, however, there were also strong financial incentives for Wall Street firms such as Kuhn Loeb and Company, of which Schiff was a senior partner, to see the old regime fall into the hands of revolutionaries who would agree to grant lucrative business concessions in the future in return for financial support today. When Trotsky returned to Petrograd in May of 1917 to organize the Bolshevik phase of the Russian Revolution, he carried $10,000 for travel expenses, a generously ample fund considering the value of the dollar at the time. The amount is known with certainty because Trotsky was arrested by Canadian and British naval personnel when the ship on which he was traveling, the SS Christianiford, put in at Halifax. The money in his possession is now a matter of official record. The source of that money has been the focus of much speculation, but the evidence strongly suggests that its origin was the German government. It was a sound investment. Trotsky was not arrested on a whim. He was recognized as a threat to the best interests of England. Canada's mother country in the British Commonwealth. Russia was an ally of England in the First World War, which then was raging in Europe. Anything that would weaken Russia, and that certainly included internal revolution, would be in effect to strengthen Germany and weaken England. In New York, on the night before his departure, Trotsky had given a speech in which he said, I'm going back to Russia to overthrow the provisional government and stop the war with Germany. That quote was from, a footnote about that. A full report on this meeting had been submitted to the U.S. military intelligence. See Senate document number 62, 66 Congress, report and hearings of the Subcommittee on the Judiciary, United States Senate, 1919, Volume 2, page 2680. Trotsky, therefore, represented a real threat to England's war effort. He was arrested as a German agent and taken as a prisoner of war. With this in mind, we can appreciate the great strength of those mysterious forces, both in England and in the United States, that intervene on Trotsky's behalf. Immediately, telegrams began to come into Halifax from such divergent sources as an obscure attorney in New York City, from the Canadian Deputy Postmaster General, and even from high-ranking British military officer, all inquiring into Trotsky's situation and urging his immediate release. The head of the British Secret Service in America at the time was Sir William Wiseman, who, as fate would have it, occupied the apartment directly above the apartment of Edward Mandell House and who had become fast friends with him. House advised Wiseman that President Wilson wished to have Trotsky released. Wiseman advised his government, and the British Admiralty issued orders on April 21st that Trotsky was to be sent on his way. And the footnote about on that was, why did we let Trotsky go? How Canada lost an opportunity to shorten the war. Maclean's magazine, Canada, June 1919. Also see Martin, page 163, 164. It was a fateful decision that would affect not only the outcome of the war, but the future of the entire world. It would be a mistake to conclude that Jacob Schiff and Germany, were the only players in this drama. Oh, excuse me, little burpee there. Trotsky could not have gone even as far as Halifax without having been granted an American passport, and this was accomplished by the personal intervention of President Wilson. Professor Anthony Sutton says, President Woodrow Wilson was the fairy godmother who provided Trotsky with a passport to return to Russia to, quote, carry forth the revolution. At the same time, careful State Department bureaucrats concerned about such revolutionaries entering Russia were unilaterally attempting to tighten up passport procedures. And that footnote was from Anthony C. Sutton, PhD, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, New Rochelle, New York, Arlington House, 1974, page 25. And there were others as well. In 1911, the St. Louis Dispatch published a cartoon by a Bolshevik named Robert Minor. Minor was later to be arrested in Tsarist Russia for revolutionary activities and in fact was himself bankrolled by famous Wall Street financiers. Since we may safely assume that he knew his topic well, his cartoon is of great historical importance. It portrays Karl Marx with a book entitled Socialism under his arm, standing amid a cheering crowd on Wall Street. Gathered around and greeting him with enthusiastic handshakes are characters in silk hats identified as John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, John D. Ryan of National City Bank, Morgan partner George W. Perkins, and Teddy Roosevelt, leader of the Progressive Party. What emerges from this sampling of events is a clear pattern of strong support for Bolshevism. coming from the highest financial and political power centers in the United States, from men who supposedly were, quote, capitalists, and who, according to conventional wisdom, should have been the mortal enemies of socialism and communism. And lo and behold, they are in cahoots, in bed with communism and socialism. Isn't that interesting? Nor was this phenomenon confined to the United States. Okay, excuse me. My allergies acting up here. Trotsky, in his book My Life, tells of a British financier who, in 1907, gave him a, quote, large loan to be repaid after the overthrow of the Tsar. Arsene Nigolovich, who witnessed the Bolshevik Revolution firsthand, has identified both the name of the financier and the amount of the loan. In private interviews, he said, I have been told that over 21 million rubles were sent by Lord Alfred Milner in financing the Russian Revolution. The financier just mentioned was by no means alone among the British to support the Russian Revolution with large financial donations. Another name specifically mentioned by Digolovich was that of Sir George Buchanan, the British ambassador of Russia at the time. And a footnote on that was C. Arseny de Gulovich, or Arsene. Sorry, butchered that name. Tsarism and Revolution, Hawthorne, California. Omni Publications, ND RPT, maybe report, from 1962, French edition, page 224, 230. I think I need a second cup of coffee. I'm not quite awake yet this morning. It was one thing for Americans to undermine Tsarist Russia and thus indirectly help Germany in the war because Americans were not then into it. But for British citizens to do so was tantamount to prison. Oh, sorry, tantamount to treason. To understand what higher loyalty compelled these men to betray their battlefield ally and to sacrifice the blood of their own countrymen, we must take a look at the unique organization to which they belong, the secret society. Lord Alfred Milner was a key figure in organizing a secret society. At the time of these events, was about 16 years old. It was dedicated to nothing less than the quiet domination of the world. The conquest of Russia was seen as but the first phase of the plan. Since the organization is still in existence today and continues to make progress toward its goal, it is important to have its history included in this narrative. One of the most authoritative reference works on the history of this group is Tragedy and Hope by Dr. Carroll Quigley. Dr. Quigley was a professor of history at Georgetown University, where President Clinton had been one of his students. He was the author of the widely used textbook, Evolution of Civilization. He was a member of the editorial board of the monthly periodical Current History, and he was a frequent lecturer and consultant for such groups as the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, the Brookings Institution, the U.S. Naval Weapons Laboratory, the Naval College, the Smithsonian Institute, and the State Department. But Dr. Quigley was no mere academic. He also had been closely associated with many of the family dynasties of the super rich. He was, by his own boast, an insider with a front row view of the world's money power structure. When Dr. Quigley wrote his scholarly 1,300-page book of dry history, it was not intended for the masses. It was to be read by the intellectual elite. And to that select readership, he cautiously exposed one of the best-kept secrets of all time. Excuse me. He also made it clear, however, that he was a friendly apologist for this group and that he supported its goals and purposes. Dr. Quigley said, I know of the operation of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. In general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. And that quote was from Carol Quigley, Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, New York, Macmillan, 1966, page 950. As mentioned, Quigley's book was intended for an elite readership composed of scholars and network insiders, but unexpectedly it began to be quoted in the journals of the John Birch Society, which correctly had perceived that his work provided a valuable insight to the inner workings of a hidden power structure. That exposure triggered a large demand for the book by people who were opposed to the network and curious to see what an insider had to say about it. That was not according to the original plan. What happened next is best described by Quigley himself. In a personal letter dated December 9, 1975, he wrote, Thank you for your praise of Tragedy and Hope, a book which has brought me headaches, as it apparently says, something which powerful people do not want known. My publisher stopped selling it in 1968 and told me he would reprint, but in 1971, he told my lawyer that they had destroyed the plates in 1968. The rare book price, sorry, went up to $135, and parts were reprinted in violation of copyright. But I could do nothing because I believed the publisher, and he would not take action even when a pirate copy of the book appeared. Only when I hired a lawyer in 1974 did I get any answers to my questions. In another personal letter, Quigley commented further on the duplicity of his publisher. They lied to me for 6 years, telling me that they would reprint what they got 2000 when they got 2,000 orders, which could never happen because they told anyone who asked that it was out of print and would not be reprinted. They denied this to me until I sent them Xerox copies of such replies in libraries, at which they told me it was a clerk's error. In other words, they lied to me but prevented me from regaining publication rights. I am now quite sure that Tragedy and Hope was suppressed. To, so that there is a footnote on that. These letters were first published in the summer 1976 issue of Conspiracy Digest, published by Peter McAlpine, Alpine Press, Dearborn, Michigan. The originals cannot now be located. However, the author was able to locate the attorney, Mr. Paul Rolfe, with the firm of Williams and Connolly, Connolly, sorry, in Washington, D.C., who represented Quigley in his legal action against the publisher. Mr. Wolfe cannot vouch for the authenticity of the letters themselves, but has confirmed in phone conversations and later in writing that the essential details are correct. He writes, It is my recollection that they withheld from me and the professor for some time the information that they had in fact destroyed, quote, the plates. To understand why, quote, powerful people would want to suppress this book, note carefully what follows. Dr. Quigley describes the goal of this network of world financiers as nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. Each central bank in the hands of men like Montague Norman of the Bank of England, Benjamin Strong of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, Charles Rist of the Bank of France, and Hjalmar Schacht, what? Schacht, sorry, butchered that name, of the Reichsbank. sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the level of economic activity in the country, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. In other words, bribing them. Quigley, that quote was from Quigley, Tragedy, page 324. Sorry. That is the information that powerful people do not want common man to know. Notice that Quigley refers to this group as a quote network. That is a precise choice of words. And it is important to an understanding of the forces of international finance. The network to which he refers is not the secret society. It is no doubt directed by it, and there are society members in key positions within the network. But we can be sure that there are many in the network who have little or no knowledge of hidden control. To explain how this can be possible, let us begin. Let us turn to the origin and growth of the secret society itself. Ruskin, Rhodes, and Milner. In 1870, a wealthy British socialist by the name of John Ruskin was appointed as professor of fine arts at Oxford University in London. He taught that the state must take control of the means of production and organize them for the good of the community as a whole. He advocated placing control of the state into the hands of a small ruling class, perhaps even a single dictator. He said, quote, "My continual aim has been to show the eternal superiority of some men to others, and sometimes even of one man to all others." That quote was from C. Kenneth Clark, Ruskin Today, New York, Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston, 1964, page 267. This, of course, is the same intellectual appeal of communism. Lenin taught that the masses could not be trusted to handle their own affairs and that a special group of disciplined intellectuals must assume this role for them. This is the function of the Communist Party, which never comprises more than about 3% of the population. Even when the charade of free elections is allowed, many members of the party, or those over whom the KGB has total control, are permitted to run for office. The concept that a ruling party or class is the ideal structure for society is at the heart of all collectivist schemes, regardless of whether they are called socialism, communism, Nazism, fascism, or any other isms which may yet be invented to disguise it. It is easy, therefore, for adherents of this elitist mentality to be comfortable in almost any of these collectivist camps, a fact to which Dr. Quigley alluded when he wrote, quote, "This network, which we may identify as the round table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists, excuse me, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups and frequently does so." That quote was from Quigley, Tragedy, page 915. Excuse me. Returning to the subject of the origins of this group, however, Dr. Quigley tells us Ruskin spoke to the Oxford undergraduates as members of the privileged ruling class. He told them that they were the possessors of a magnificent tradition of education, beauty, rule of law, freedom, decency, and self-discipline, but that this tradition could not be saved and did not deserve to be saved unless it could be extended to the lower classes in England itself and to the non-English masses throughout the world. Excuse me, Ruskin's message had a sensational impact. His inaugural lecture was copied out in longhand by one undergraduate, Cecil Rhodes, who kept it with him for 30 years. And that quote was from Quigley, Tragedy, page 130. Cecil Rhodes made one of the world's greatest fortunes. With the corporation of the Bank of England and the financiers like Rothschild, he was able to establish a virtual monopoly over the diamond output of South Africa and most of the country's gold as well. The major portion of this vast income was spent to advance the ruling class ideas of John Ruskin. Dr. Quigley explains the Rhodes Scholarships, established by the terms of Cecil Rhodes' seventh will, are known to everyone. What is not so widely known is that Rhodes, in five previous wills, left his fortune to form a secret society, which was to devote itself to the preservation and expansion of the British Empire. But what does not seem to be known to anyone is that this secret society was created by Rhodes and his principal trustee, Lord Milner, and continues to exist to this day. In his book on Rhodes' wills, he, Stead, who was a member of the inner circle, wrote in one place, Mr. Rhodes was more than a founder of a dynasty. He aspired to be the creator of one of those vast semi-religious quasi-political associations, which, like the Society of Jesus, have played so large a part in the history of the world. To be more strictly accurate, he wished to found an order as the instrument of the will of the dynasty. And that quote was from Carol Quigley, The Anglo-American Establishment, From Rhodes to Cliveden, New York Books in Focus, 1981, page 9, Roman numeral 9, 36. In this secret society, Rhodes was to be leader, Stead, Brett, which is Lord Asher, and Milner were to form an executive committee. Arthur Lord Balfour, Sir Henry Johnston, Lord Rothschild, Albert Lord Grey, and others were listed as potential members of a circle of initiates, while there was to be an outer circle known as the Association of Helpers, later organized by Milner as the Round Table Organization. And that quote was from Quigley Tragedy, page 131. The pattern of conspiracy. Here then was the classical pattern of political conspiracy. This was the structure that made it possible for Quigley to differentiate between the international, quote, network and the secret society within that network. At the center, there is always a tiny group in complete control, with one man as the undisputed leader. Next is a circle of secondary leadership that, for the most part, is unaware of an inner core. They're led to believe that they are the innermost ring. In time, as these conspiracies are built from the center out, they form additional rings of organization. Those in the outer echelons usually are idealists with an honest desire to improve the world. They never suspected an inner control for other purposes, and only those few who demonstrate a ruthless capacity for higher leadership are ever allowed to see it. After the death of Cecil Rhodes, the inner core of his secret society fell under the control of Lord Alfred Milner, Governor General and High Commissioner of South Africa. As director of a number of public banks and as corporate precursor of England's Midland Bank, he became one of the greatest political and financial powers in the world. Milner recruited into his secret society, a group of young men, chiefly from Oxford and Toynbee Hall. And according to Quigley, though through his influence, these men were able to win influential posts in government and international finance and became the dominant influence in British imperial and foreign affairs up to 1939. In 1909 to 1913, they organized semi-secret groups known as Round Table groups in the chief British dependencies and the United States. Money for the widely ramified activities of this organization came chiefly from the Rhodes Trust itself and from wealthy associates such as the Bate brothers, from Sir Abe Bailey, and after 1915 from the Astor family, and from foundations and firms associated with the international banking fraternity, especially the Carnegie United Kingdom Trust, and other organizations associated with J.P. Morgan, the Rockefeller and Whitney families, and the associates of Lazard Brothers and of Morgan Greenfeld and Company. Dot, dot, dot. At the end of 1914, it became clear that the organization of the system had to be greatly extended. Once again, the task was entrusted to Lionel Curtis, who established in England and each Dominion a front organization to the existing local roundtable group. This front organization, called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, had as its nucleus in each area the existing submerged roundtable group. In New York, it was known as the Council on Foreign Relations and was a front for J.P. Morgan and Company in association with the very small American Roundtable Group. And that quote was from Quigley, Tragedy, page 132, also page 951 to 952. The Council on Foreign Relations was a spin-off from the failure of the world's leaders at the end of World War I to embrace the League of Nations as a true world government. It became clear to the master planners that they had been unrealistic in their expectations for rapid acceptance. If their plan were to be carried forward, it would have to be done on the basis of patient gradualism, symbolized by the Fabian turtle. Rose Martin says, Colonel House was only one man, where a multitude was needed. He had set the pattern and outlined goals for the future, but he still had a scheme or two in mind. In particular, he foresaw it would be necessary for the Fabians to develop a top-level Anglo-American planning group in the field of foreign relations, which could secretly influence policy on the one hand and gradually, quote, educate public opinion on the other. To the ambitious young Fabians, British and American, who had flocked to the peace conference as economists and junior officials, it soon became evident that the New World Order was not about to be produced at Paris. For them, Colonel House arranged a dinner meeting at the Hotel Majestic on May 19, 1919, together with a select group of Fabian certified Englishmen, notably Arnold Toynbee, R.H. Tawney, and John Maynard Keynes. All were equally disillusioned for various reasons by the consequences of the peace. They made a gentleman's agreement to set up an organization with branches in England and America, quote, to facilitate the scientific study of international questions, unquote. As a result, two potent and closely related opinion-making bodies were found. The English branch was called the Royal Institute of International Affairs. The American branch, known as the Institute of International Affairs, was reorganized in 1921 as the Council on Foreign Relations. And that quote was from Martin, page 174 to 175. It was through this front group called the Council on Foreign Relations and its influence over the media, tax-exempt foundations, universities, and government agencies that the international financiers have been able to dominate the domestic and foreign policies of the United States ever since. We shall have more to say about the CFR, but our focal point for now is Great Britain and, in particular, the help given to communism in Russia by Lord Alfred Milner and his web of secret societies. Wow, this is even better than the movies. It's got lots of intrigue and espionage and conspiracy theories and all those other ingredients needed for a juicy movie plot, right? That's funny. All right. As they say, the truth is more, what's the phrase? The truth is more interesting, or there's more truth in fact than fiction, or whatever that phrase is called. I don't remember now. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that, and we will continue our reading next week for part 2. In the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day. All right, bye-bye now.